that leads me to one of my favorite sentences Charlie O'Connor has ever written. And I read a lot of his stuff. He's very good. But this was just such a easy, poignant sentence. At even strength in particular, Drysdale has performed terribly to this point in his career.
It's true. Yes.
Oof.
Not been good.
Yeah. You always try to leave room for nuance. You never attempt to like come off as, well, this is definite. Like, you're very much like you always try to leave room for all possibilities because you never want to come off as, I know better than everyone. That is one of the most straightforward sentences I have ever read that you have written, because it's objective. Like, look at the numbers. He has stunk. And man, that is, I think so many people have focused on the injury aspect. I don't want to get to that as well, because you have a very interesting take on that. And I think Bryn made a graphic for it too. The injury thing, I think people have focused on so much because it's been such an issue. He missed, all but 8 games the 1 year, and he doesn't play. He has the injury. He has no training camp. He comes back. He gets hurt right away. And then the Flyers trade for him. He gets hurt a couple of games into that. Like, we focus so much on the injuries. It's like, oh, well, if he's healthy, he'll be fine. Maybe? There's a lot. He has some tools. Absolutely. The dude has some tools.
There's a lot of really good tools. Yeah.
But to this point, he has not put them together yet. And that could very much be a part of why, Keith Jones looked at me and you, Charlie, and was like, this dude should not have been in the NHL when he was in the NHL. Like, we think he was developed wrong. And now it's up to them to get the most out of whatever they can of this still 22-year-old defenseman after the first 3.5 years of his NHL career were handled incorrectly according to the people who sought to trade for him. Yeah, and this is the development process. Like, Charlie, you have this theory about him being injury prone where you just don't kind of buy it, and it's more so about, like, yeah, if you just look at the games he's missed, but when you look at how he has been developed, it's shit, man.
Yeah, it's not great.
Well, he had the misfortune of being drafted at a really bad time, not just for hockey players, but really for the world. So he was drafted in 2020. Obviously, 2020 was the year from hell. So that's the remote draft, whatever. So he gets drafted in 2020. His draft year, he doesn't finish because obviously everything stops in March. Draft plus 1 year, you look at his stats and you're like, oh, he didn't play that much in his draft plus 1 year. You kind of forget, like, no one really did. He played in 38 games that year in the AHL and the NHL. He should have been in the OHL, but the OHL never played. It never got started again. There were no OHL games that year. So he gets rushed to the AHL and the NHL because he's on a team that I guess was excited because he was playing well in the AHL. I was like, well, let's put him in the NHL. And reality, probably shouldn't have been there. So draft plus 1 season, doesn't play in his age-appropriate league, gets rushed to the pro game. Draft plus 2 season, he plays 81 games, misses only 1 game. Super injury prone, right? Missed 1 game in his rookie year. It's on a team that's a mess. The Ducks are terrible. They're a disaster. They had 3 GMs that season. If you I put that in my article.
Yeah.
His draft plus 3 season. This is his 2nd year. He loses pretty much the entire season due to injury. He plays, I believe, in 8 games before he hurts his shoulder, has labrum surgery, misses the season. So that's when the injury concerns start up. Then his draft plus 4 season, he has a weird thing where he ends up in something of a contract holdout situation. He signs the contract. I think it was about like a week before the season starts. I have to wonder if maybe he wasn't fully conditioned because he goes in for game 1. That's like 8 days after he signs the contract, after not participating really in camp. And he immediately has a sports hernia, plays through that all year, gets traded to a new team, re-injures his shoulder, not to the point where he needs surgery, but does have to sit out some time with the Flyers. And then there's also the fact that he's coming back from a season where he didn't play. So that almost certainly had a negative impact on his development and also just on him being comfortable on the ice. So thus far, his developmental process, his 4 seasons post-draft, have been kind of a shit show. And I think it is reasonable to theorize that to this point, that has had a negative impact on the player that he is to this point. The Flyers are betting that they can now develop him properly. And he's not old. He's 22. He'll be 23, I believe, in January. He's not old. They just fixed, to a degree, obviously they didn't fix him to the point where he's an all-star. They fixed Rasmus Ristolainen, who was like 27, 28.
Yeah.
And presumably it's a lot easier to fix a 22-year-old than to fix a guy who's played in the league for like nearly a decade. So they believe they can fix Drysdale. Are they right? I don't know. But I think it is – you can't tell the story of Jamie Drysdale's career without acknowledging that the first 4 years of his career, he's dealt with a lot of shit that it makes sense that it would mess him up.
And this is – I think we talked about this last week. Like, okay, you look at that graphic – in reality, in life, in the calendar, it's his draft plus 4 year. But like, really, I feel like we should be treating it like draft plus 2 based on like all of the shit that happened, like the pandemic stuff, the shortened seasons, like all of that. Like you can't just hand wave that away and act like this is the same developmental trajectory that you would have had with a guy drafted in 2004 in 2008.
Yeah.
Like it's just not the same. And I think it's hard for us to like to give that kind of break to these players because no one ever wants to give these guys a break. Like they're professional athletes. You want them to perform the way that they're supposed to perform. I think it's reasonable to expect that you could quote unquote fix a guy that for all intents and purposes is in the stage of his development that I think arguably you could say someone who was drafted 2 years ago in a normal situation would be. Like, it's not, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. Like, it doesn't seem like a far-fetched idea to me to think that based on that chunk of time that he's had as a professional hockey player, it's just not been that much time. It's not been that many physical games played. Like, whatever's wrong with him, it's not that ingrained. Like you said, it's not Risto. Like he hasn't been doing the bad things for 10 years like Risto was when we got him, and still somehow we're able to like unteach some of the shitty things that he was doing. It just, I feel like it's odd to me that people are willing to be so pessimistic about this, given I feel like logically the likelihood is that you could make him better than worse. I don't know. It just seems like logical to me. Like if you think the tools are there, if you think that he has what it takes to turn into X player, like you can't just pretend that that doesn't exist. Like he hasn't had the opportunity to be played. I don't know. Do you get what I'm saying? I'm rambling. Yeah. But I just think that like the logical way to look at this, I feel like, is as a positive outcome is more likely than not.
And I don't even think it's necessarily, I don't even necessarily has to be a positive outcome. I just think it the way I look at Jamie Drysdale is I don't know. But I do think there's enough here that has me think that like he's not destined to suck. And he's also not destined to always be injured, which is the other thing you hear constantly.
That's
like
silly.
Maybe he's injury prone. Maybe. It's possible. It's possible. And maybe he's not even that he's injury prone. Maybe it's that he had the shoulder surgery and now that shoulder is always going to be weak for the rest of his career. I guess that's possible. Like, I can't rule that out. However, we're not talking about a guy who has been injured every year of his career. And I talk about this in the piece. His draft year, or actually, it wasn't even his draft year. It was the year before his draft year. His first year in the OHL, he appeared in 92.6% of possible games. His draft year, he appeared in 91% of possible games. The year after his draft year, he appeared in 90.5% of possible games. And then his first full NHL season, he appeared in 98.8% of possible games. His overall availability rate from the time he started his OHL career through his draft plus 2 season, that's 4 seasons, is about 94% availability, which is pretty good. So we're not talking about a guy who every year got hurt and missed a lot of time. We're talking about a guy who was almost always available. Then in his Draft Plus 3 season, 2 seasons ago, he hurt his shoulder. He had shoulder surgery. Okay, that's not great. He missed a year. It's bad. And then last year, it was a year from hell. He gets hurt first game of the year, gets traded. He's coming back from missing a season. Then he re-injures his shoulder. So really what we're talking about are 2 seasons where he dealt with injury. Is it possible that is a harbinger of what is to come, and he is always going to do those types of seasons? Like he's going to have another season where he misses half the year. Is that going to be a thing? It could be. Like I can't rule that possibility out. But we also shouldn't dismiss out of hand the possibility that he's just gotten really unlucky the last 2 years. Like that is also very possible. That this is not an injury-prone player. This is a guy who just had bad luck. And then this season, maybe for the next 5 years, he's going to have good luck. And he's barely going to miss any time. It's okay for us to say that we just don't know. That's all I'm asking for us just to say we don't know and then buy the ticket and take the Jamie Drysdale ride and see what happens.
There you go.
Yeah, and maybe buy a Dry Guy the Fly Guy shirt at PHLYlocker.com. That would be fun. No, I'm willing to kind of wave off the injury stuff because, as Charlie laid out, it's not as crazy as it looks. If you just go to his hockey reference and look at games played, you're like, oh, what the hell? And then with added context, it's like, oh, okay. So it's basically just this past year and the year before he was hurt. Every other year he's been healthy, including going back to the OHL. The development stuff, I'm willing to go, yeah, man, because I think guys drafted between like 2018 and 2022 just didn't have all of the tools at their disposal that everyone else has. Because even like a weird year, like say what could have been Ovechkin's rookie year, like we talked about earlier, loses that to the lockout. He gets to play in the K. Like all those guys like drafted those years, they still get to play in juniors. And like, remember Richards and Carter joining the AHL joining the Phantoms for the Calder Cup playoffs. Like there was still hockey to be played. He couldn't play in the OHL, and it was like, all right, shit.
He couldn't leave his house.
Yeah,
for
like,
fuck's sake.
And like even team meetings and stuff are different. Like the way he's being coached and the way teams are being run, it's all different. So I'm just willing to grant the possibility that those years were kind of just fucked up, and they were for a lot of guys. And we are going to see a bunch of dudes from those, like I think 18 to 22 drafts break out at like 25, 26 rather than 22, 23. I just think that that's a real possibility. That said, the thing that scares me most now, it's not the injuries and all that. It's, is he any good? Like that's really what it comes down to, because he's in the 81 game season. He scored 32 points. All right. Pretty good for a young puck moving defenseman. I'll take that. But every other number Charlie has laid out about this guy, they're not great.